welcome. I am Vanessa Mahoney. I am the chapter co-director for Startup Grind's Grand Rapids here in very snowy Michigan today. For those of you that don't know Startup Grind, we are a global organization with a mission to give startups everywhere the education, the opportunities they need to build, to grow, and to scale their companies by putting events together like this one and helping our local entrepreneurs expand their market reach. I particularly love volunteering for innovation. I love the idea of fostering a community that helps founders in those early days where they're tackling some really tough challenges and it could feel isolating perhaps. So for my day job, I am a marketing advisor and I'm passionate about all things space. So when this opportunity to showcase how innovation is shaping our world for Global Entrepreneurship Week came about with our chapter directors around the world, the first thing that came to mind was the space industry for me. The space industry is the next frontier, and some estimates expect it to be worth 1.8 trillion by 2035 with technology we already use today and with new innovations. If you took an Uber, for example, they are relying on GPS signals that originate from a satellite in space. So having said that, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Adam Kall, co-founder and director of science for KMI, a high-growth hardware startup breaking barriers in the space industry with plenty of lessons for all startups from their journey of keeping space clear for all with their orbital debris removal technology. And with that, welcome, Adam.
Thank you so much for that introduction, and thank you to everyone who joined in on this talk. So yeah, doing a company that involves a rocket launch, that was kind of daunting when we started the company, and I tell you what, it's still daunting now. I get to use this image as the background for the first slide because that is not just any Falcon 9 launch, that was their recent SpaceX Cargo 31 launch that brought our payload up to the ISS. So it is a bit kind of mind-blowing to look at that image and think, oh yeah, no, we put a thing on there. And that is a long journey in the making. I'm excited to tell everyone about it today. So wanted to throw this image on there because we were digging through the folder and preparing this slide of various images the company has, and we found this one from back in 2020 of me and my two other co-founders, Austin and Troy, with our KMI branded masks. I don't know if anyone else remembers that, of getting your favorite logo or your company logo on your mask, back in COVID, attending our first space conference. And wow, what has changed since then. Just recently, when that rocket launched back on November 4th, we gathered as much of the team as we could physically in our office here in Marquette, Michigan, up in the Upper Peninsula, as well as we had several talented members who were remote, either because they live in other parts of the country or because they were down in Florida to actually attend the launch in person. This journey has been really nothing but remarkable and really only possible through this amazing group of employees that we've been able to gather and work towards this goal together. And what is that goal? So the thing that we were addressing when we founded in 2019 was a known problem about space debris. Me and the two co-founders, we all loved space and we all wanted to work in space, but we also were very young. And we recognized that if we wanted a career in space, something that we could go into and retire from in 40 years, it was going to need a bit more longevity than space debris was providing. This is what the chart looked like in 2019, showing the growth of objects in space. Yes, that bottom dark bar is payloads, so functional satellites, but as you can see, there's still plenty of growth in other objects, most concerning the unidentified bar of just objects that we don't even know where they came from, showing up. And by 2019, we looked at this graph and said, that kind of looks like the part of an exponential curve when it really starts taking off. And in the last 5 years, it has done exactly that. There has been a 70% increase in the number of objects in the last 5 years. And while some of that has come from the exceptional number of Starlink satellites and mega constellations that are being put up, that accounts for less than half of the new objects in the last 5 years. The debris problem is not a problem for the future, it's a problem for today. And so back in 2019, we founded the company saying, all right, we have limited time. We need to start working on our solution now. We need to start working on a product that can actually resolve this problem and be ready for market as this continues to get worse so that we can kind of step in and solve the problem. So we looked at the situation in 2019 and kind of tried to analyze the whole problem from the standpoint of what do we need to do? And we realized that there were two gaps in the satellite market. It's kind of shocking that there were only two. If you think about a satellite, you think about the fact, I'm sorry, air pressure in the office opened the door for a moment. If you think about a satellite, there turns out to be plenty of parts of it that are actually solved already. So how will we know where the satellite is? Well, GPS receivers are offered as a kind of off-the-shelf component. How will the satellite fly? The engines are produced by companies, including Orbion Space Technology, a fellow Michigan company just 99 miles up the road. So we looked at this and looked at this opportunity of all the other kind of more standard components of the mission could be provided by companies that already make them. And so we looked and said, what are the parts that are not standard? What are the parts that are very specific to our mission of grabbing unprepared space objects, unprepared debris? And we saw two gaps. One is the software in order to see the target, and the other is the hardware in order to grab the target. For the software, I like to point out this article that came out earlier this year where Astroscale, they made history because they went and observed a piece of space debris. They did not capture the debris, they observed the debris. And while this is an amazing accomplishment, and we were very proud of them and very excited to see the images, that was a very high cost for a satellite that just provided additional information without additional action. So we looked at this problem and realized, okay, if you have one targeting observation mission and one target capture mission, that's twice as hard as this needs to be. You need to be able to combine these capabilities together, and that's going to require a satellite that doesn't launch with preloaded information about the target, but gathers that information in situ. When it's around the target, when it approaches the target, that's when it understands what does the target look like, what is it made of, and how do we grab hold of it. So then that last part, how do we grab hold of it? Well, the first part is you need an end effector. You need something to physically make contact. There was a great test called Remove Debris, where they went up to the ISS, they extended this metal plate out on a tether, and then they shot it with a harpoon. This was a proof of concept to show that, yes, we can capture things in space. We can take something that was unconnected and make it connected to our target by impaling it with a harpoon. But we looked at that and said, that's not the future of the industry. That can't be the solution we use. What we need is something that is safe, something that is reusable, where if we capture a target and then let it go, we can capture another one and get more captures out of each spacecraft. It needs to be releasable, where once we capture a target, we're not just dragging it along with us everywhere we go, that we're able to release it into a lower orbit or to a collection station, and it needs to be cost efficient. We need to focus in on how do we drive down costs for this kind of mission, because that's the number one barrier for customers. And I'll talk about that more later in the presentation. So to solve this problem of both the software and the hardware, we developed Laylabs. Laylabs is the name for, Laylabs is the name for the spacecraft design. Again, a design built from available off-the-shelf components, but it utilizes, it utilizes two pieces of technology. The first is Tumblr. This is the kind of software suite and hardware components that allow us to observe a target on approach and through machine learning and AI, develop the docking solution at that moment. Rather than preloading a docking or having it to send a lot of data to the ground for us to figure it out by hand, we're able to have an AI solution that is able to develop those docking patterns in space when it's right with the target. The other capability is reach, which is the far more evident part in these images. Those are those 8 tentacles that are designed to approach a target and then unravel around the geometry of the target. Now, those 3 images that I have there are from a CGI rendering of this solution, but I also have images from when we were testing it in the lab back in 2022, as well as the recent testing at NASA Ames for the ISS demo that the payload has now been launched and it has conducted the first experiment up on the ISS. So this solution kind of in motion, you can see how the design has the arms unfold. And the specific part about that unfold is how they can travel along the geometry. The whole idea is that whether it is a cube or a cylinder or some other geometry, we needed a solution that was amendable to be able to grab onto those various geometries and not, oh, we launched the wrong end effector, we launched the square one, and the target is a cylinder. We couldn't run into that situation. We needed a universal adapter. And then something very exciting, I was able to add this 30 minutes ago. We actually got release from NASA because we conducted our first science mission last week on the ISS. And these are some of the images that were taken during that test. So you can see how our payload is that 4-armed payload that you just saw in the video working at NASA Ames. It was now able to go up to the ISS and perform the first of several tests related to capture and prove that this technology works in microgravity. And that's something extremely exciting. Just pointing out the astronaut, that's Commander Sunny. She was fantastic in helping us with this experiment and getting everything oriented. And this is an amazing accomplishment because going from a company that has a CGI rendering of what we want to do to one that has shown that capability in space, that's the difference between being one of 1,000 to one of a couple dozen companies that have put something into space. I'll go ahead and pause here for just a second. Vanessa, are there any questions in the chat that are worth addressing at this point, or should I continue with the presentation?
No, I think we're good.
Excellent. If there are any questions and you would like to put them in the chat, I'm more than happy to answer those questions throughout the presentation, as well as there will be time at the end to answer any questions. So,
all right, sorry, Adam, to interrupt, but Keith did ask, how does it feel?
It feels unbelievable. One little tidbit that you don't see in these images is on our payload, on the side of it that's covered up by that little robot called Astrobeam, there is actually a plaque that lists the names of all the team members that helped put this into space. So it's remarkable enough to imagine that the prototype that I helped work on and frankly spent many weekends this past summer working on and developing is up in space. There's also a little piece of metal that has my name on it floating on the ISS. And that's an experience that is both shocking and repeated every time that my app tells me the ISS is going overhead. So I step out on my back porch and I'm able to watch the little dot travel across the sky and think my name is up there. It is
so surreal. Congratulations.
Thank you. So this was kind of the story of what KMI has been. We had this mission of wanting to solve space debris, wanting to develop a solution for it. And then we went through this journey of development, producing the hardware, figuring out the software, and getting it up into space for its first tests. But why did we go this route? Why did we go this route of building hardware? And that is something that I specifically wanted to highlight of we're a hardware startup. And that is not what you typically see. If you go by the numbers, if you just go by percentages, the vast majority of startups, especially startups that get investor funding, are software startups. And there's a very easy reason for that. The top line here is the journey of software startup. Very early on, you're able to get something working with software. And it doesn't cost much money either. You're able to code up something, you get a brilliant founder or some help from brilliant employees, you code up something, and early on in your company, you have a hype cycle. Everyone's excited. You have a software, you're able to show it working, it's flashy, it's pretty, it does something, and it looks like a product. The only issue is that if your software then needs to be combined with hardware, you're going to have a dip in that hype. You're going to travel down and down as investors who bought into the hype and said, wow, this company's going somewhere, and they gave you money expecting a return. They start asking, when's the next thing going to come out? When's the next thing going to come out? And the reality is hardware takes time to develop. It's a long process. And especially if you try to rush it, you're going to end up with bad results. It takes time. Eventually, though, you'll get the hardware and you'll have another hype cycle where everyone's really excited that, yeah, you release the hardware. And then they're going to be waiting for the next development again. You end up in this elongated hype cycle that, yes, you get to capitalize on the early hype, but you then have to deal with the trough. And I know so many founders who have run into the situation of, within 6 months of founding, they get investment. They get an investor who's interested, they join in, they give them, sometimes more than $1 million of funding. And then the next 2 years is them being stressed out of their minds because that investor is expecting returns. They're not returns monetarily at that point, but returns in progress. And the reality is you did not the easy, but the quickest part first. And now you have the long road ahead. So KMI, we tried to follow a strategy that was this lower section, which was starting with the engineering, starting with the hardware. The difficulty here was we didn't have the hype cycle. So we bootstrapped from the beginning for 2 years before we took on our first investment. And our first investment round was friends and family, and it was less than $500,000. So we definitely had to make it work with very cost-effective processes and very low funding. But when we were able to produce that initial hardware, not even the hardware that went up to the ISS, but just the initial hardware of showing something working to people, to investors, that hype cycle peaked very quickly and investors got very interested. And then as it started to die down, we were able to hit another hype cycle moment quite quickly after that. We were able to show the software working. We were able to show a prototype up in space. We basically took the longest part of our journey, moved it to the very front when people didn't know about us, and now we get to capitalize on reiterating the hype cycle with new news roughly every 6 months of keeping it up and keeping it exciting. So this is one part of our strategy that I'll admit doesn't work for everyone because some companies don't have a hardware component. They're just software. But I would argue in that case, you still have a similar flow of you can get something that looks presentable and looks pretty early on, but make sure you aren't doing that first in exchange for a 2 year or longer period of really hard work, where you also will have an investor breathing down your neck asking, where are the results? Where's the results? The other aspect is, as we produce this prototype and as we produce our first MVP, we are following what is called the battleship model. And this is a term that comes from hardware, but I think there's a kind of connection between this and software. If you are making a product that is a battleship model, there's a couple rules. You don't care about the size of it, the volume. You don't care about the mass of it. The cost of it doesn't really matter on a per unit basis. Obviously, you need to have the funds to be able to build it in the first place. But if that one unit costs a lot of money, but you know you can shrink it in the future, that's fine. And you only need to make one of them. Now, this sounds like a bad product. This sounds like an oversized, overexpensive product that doesn't do what it needs to do. But the battleship model, referring to the fact that if you have something on a battleship, the ship is able to carry a lot of weight and a lot of material. The battleship model also comes with another set of rules, which is that the product needs to be highly effective at its purpose. It needs to be incredibly reliable. It needs to get the job done every single time. And you need to have the path for improvement. It is my opinion that many software startups specifically start with the first set of rules and they make an initial software product that gets the job done. It doesn't matter how big the file size is. It doesn't matter what they have to do manually on the back end to get it working, but they get something working and they don't completely clear the second set of rules of having it be extremely effective, extremely reliable. The idea here is that you can figure out volume, mass, and cost later on with incremental improvements, but you want to start from the point of functionality. You want to start from the point of something working, because as the saying goes, you only have one chance to make a first impression. When you show the community, when you show the wider world your product, you don't want to show them a half-baked product and then say, no, we'll keep working on it and it will get better. You want to show them a working product and you say, we'll keep working on it, it's going to get cheaper. We'll keep working on it, it's going to get smaller, it's going to get lighter. You don't want to have to say, we'll keep working on it and eventually it will do the thing we promised it would do. So that's what we're doing for our prototype. Just to bring it back to KMI, is this first prototype is larger than it needs to be. It's heavier than it needs to be. It definitely costs more money than it needs to, but it works. And that was the biggest part. If we went through all this effort to get up to the ISS, let alone getting into space, and we're going to go perform our mission, I am not worried if my mission costs 50% more than I planned for. I'm not worried if my mission is a little bit heavier and going to have a little bit less fuel in it. I am worried, does my first mission work? Is it functional? The next point is talking about a concept called show versus do. So this was a concept that came up very early on when we were talking with an investor who asked us, couldn't you just make a model of your satellite, right? Throw together some wood and build a model of the satellite. We could have done that, but it would have been entirely unfunctional. It would have had zero do. It would have only been show. 100% show is a model or a CGI rendering that is really pretty to look at. It gets the point across, but it doesn't do anything on its own. 100% do is an engineering model that's on an incredibly messy desk, which I still can't believe we allowed them to take a photo like this without at least cleaning it off a little bit of the product doing what it's supposed to be doing. But that's not overly ideal. That wasn't posed by marketing. That was an engineer snapped a quick photo and we saved it on our drive. The trade-off that I like to make between these is that it's not the middle ground being 50% of each. There is actually a trade-off where you can do, as the graph up here shows, there is a middle point that is a compromise, but it's a compromise where you kind of get 80% of the benefit of each. And for us, that is the ISS prototype. We made several choices with this ISS prototype to make it look better. The way it looks does not impact the functionality. So why did we spend time doing that, especially with me just talking about the battleship model? Because it was the minimal amount of effort we needed to put in order to have it look impressive, such that when ground control received the payload and prepared it for launch, they told us they were excited. When the astronauts unpacked it and they started using it, you could see on their faces and in their commentary to ground station how excited they were and how cool it looked. The astronauts were the ones that actually asked us if they could take pictures with their high-res cameras that they normally use for taking pictures of the Earth. They brought it in and said, "Oh, can we take pictures of this? It looks so cool." And all of that was achieved with a minimal amount of effort on the showing part. You make a functional model, you add the minimal amount of kind of show and pizzazz to it to make it impressive. Just again, bringing it back to software, not to hit on software constantly, but I know that that is a more common experience for founders than hardware. When you're dealing with software, you definitely want it to work. It doesn't need to work in 100% of cases, but you need it to work in the majority of normal cases. You also need it to look good. It doesn't need to look perfect. It doesn't need to have every part of its visual and user interface figured out, but you need to have enough of that figured out that the user can look at it and say, "That's cool. I want to share the word about it. I want to tell people about this thing that I was able to see." The next point is about pricing your service. So this one maybe is not as relatable to software because every software package loves to price its service. They love to say, only $9.99 per month per user or something like that. The interesting thing is that in the world of business, whether it's software or hardware or service or whatever it is, the saying is make your price the maximum amount that a customer is willing to pay right now. That is how you optimize for revenue. I should know, before I started the company, I worked for an airline. That's all my job was figuring out how to adjust the airline prices to be the maximum amount that people were willing to pay at a certain date before the flights took off. The thing is that is not the same as contact us for pricing. And in the world of space, but also more so now in the world of other kind of terrestrial industries, I'm seeing contact us for pricing more and more often. The logic there is if you have the customer contact you at that specific moment, you can start the conversation with, "Oh, how badly do you need this? What are your pain points?" And really kind of figure out how desperate is this customer for your product and how much can you charge. Because especially in space where it's a low volume, you don't want to end up with a case where you sell your service, it's one of maybe 4 sales you'll make that year, and you only sold it for $1 million when that customer would have paid $3 million. That feels like money left on the ground. For our case of it being a new market, there was a fallacy sneakily hidden within this, which was the fact that we did a customer survey of all potential customers that we could find and who would respond to us, because our competitors were not posting prices. They were all saying, "Contact us for pricing." So we decided, okay, let's survey the customers and ask them, how much do you think this service costs? Since no one is putting a price out there, let's see what the customer is perceiving. And the perception for the customers was that removal of a single object would cost $100 million. We also then asked them, what would you like to see it cost? What is your idealized cost that you would suddenly be more interested in the service? And they said 10 million or less. And we all kind of looked at those results and got a little shocked because that was our price point. We were pricing around 10 million or less, but we were following everyone else in the industry of saying, contact us for pricing. We were like, oh, there's a rule, don't put your pricing out. After we did this customer survey, we realized that rule's a little dumb. We should put our pricing out. The reason the market wasn't existing wasn't because the price was too high. It was because the imagined price was too high. There is a saying in movie making, if you're making a horror movie, called "Don't Show the Monster." And the logic behind it is that no matter how good your props department, no matter how good your CGI, the imagined monster, when you show when you have a sound in the darkness or a scratching at the window, what we imagine as the danger is always worse than what you can visualize. Same thing occurs with price. If you don't provide any price, the price the customer imagines is always going to be worse than the price you offer. Either they imagine a much higher price and then figure, I can't even ask them how much it costs because I can't afford it, or they imagine a much lower price and then are disappointed when the reality is more than that. I am of the opinion that between a customer and a service provider, one of you has to start with the price. And if you rely on the customer, you're going to lose a lot of customers who aren't willing to take that risk. As the business provider, you should be putting out your price. And so that's what we did. The image on the right is a website called Wayfinder. You can find our specific part of it at kmi.privateer.com. And this website has a bunch of debris objects that we have put a price to, that we have said, that is how much it costs. That if you give us that amount of money, we will go perform the service. And now the impetus is on us of make a business case with that price point. It's not on the customer to haggle with us over millions of dollars. It's on us to optimize our process and make the most profit we can at the price point that the customer is willing to pay. So for other businesses, for other startups, it's very common when you're fresh and you're just creating something and you don't really know what the value of it is yet, you don't want to put out a price, because what if you get it wrong? I would argue put that price out. As long as it's a price that your company can survive at, maybe not even thrive at, but just survive at. Put the price out so that you can attract those customers that are just window shopping. They don't want to have a conversation. They don't want to email you. They want to look on your website, see the price, and they already know that's a price I can afford. In this situation, if you completely screw it up in the worst ways, there's something you can do. If you put way too high of a price and no customers are reaching out to you, lower your prices. No one is going to be upset when you lower your prices. They're not going to come in and say, hey, I saw your website 4 months ago and the price was higher. How dare you lower your price? Customers like it when you lower the price. So the more concerning case is, what if you put your price too low? What if at the beginning you give too low of a price, you have more customers show up than you can possibly deal with, and you know you're losing money because if you had set it a little bit higher, they still would have shown up. Start charging for expediency. Say, hey, we have a limited supply, right? We're a small company. We can only make so many of these, or we can only have so many licenses of this software. If you would like to get in first, here is the price to get in on the pre-beta. Here is the price to get the order now versus pre-order it for later. You can start to segment your customers by offering a value increase along with a price increase. So that's my suggestion about pricing your service. Vanessa, before I move on, are there any questions to answer?
Yeah, I have a question. How much debris would you estimate is out there?
So I don't need to estimate it because we track it pretty quickly. Right now, there's about 45,000 pieces of trackable debris, which is debris that is larger than 10 centimeters and smaller than 10 centimeters, which is still large enough to cause significant damage to a satellite. The estimate is somewhere between 100,000 and 1 million of those pieces, but we can't track them from the ground if they're lower than 10 centimeters. So they are a bit more of the unseen danger of space.
And that's with those numbers going up, right? I think I read somewhere
Yeah.
that satellite launches are meant to double year on year. So I can only imagine how much more debris there'd be out there.
The risk of collision increases by a power scaling with the number of objects. So if you double the number of objects, you don't double the chance of a collision, you quadruple it. So it definitely is a risky situation that is getting more risky with every passing year, and we really need to do something to slow down the environment and calm down the situation. Any other questions?
Nope, that's what we can.
Okay. So then we put out a price there, but what actually is our product? And this was an area that we struggled at for a while because we did start with an optimistic and idealistic mission. We said we need to clean up space debris, keeping space clear for all. That was our tagline very early on, and we still hold true to it today. We do believe that we need to clean up space and keep it clear for all. But we were running into a problem, which is cleaning up space debris. It's kind of a problem that you know you should do, but you also can keep ignoring it. It's kind of like cleaning your baseboards or vacuuming your floors or doing things like that, where you can put it off for a while, even though you know you should do it. The immediate cost, in that case of time, or in our case of dollars to the operators, feels worse than the incremental dirtying of your home or dirtying of your space environment. So we were running into a problem that, except for a very few specific use cases where a specific piece of debris was a specific problem for one operator, we weren't finding that customer connection for the service of removing debris. And that's when we, thought about it, worked on it, really did our role as founders to guide the company and say, what do we do about this? What is the product we can offer that actually has a customer base today? And the answer was using the same technology. Nothing changed about our method for grabbing onto uncontrolled objects, but using that same technology, we realized we can actually offer a product to the whole lifespan. So orbit change. This is not a satellite is launched and then needs to be moved somewhere else. That is called an OTV, on orbit transfer vehicle, and it's a well-known market, but you have to prepare it in advance. What we realized was this is actually an opportunity for the situations where the satellite is launched and doesn't make it to the orbit it needs to go into. It's a fully functional satellite, but its engine doesn't work, or the engine that it paid for a ride on doesn't work. So it's in space, it's working, but it's stuck at a low altitude. That is an opportunity that occurs 2 to 4 times a year for satellite missions that we could take advantage of by offering that just-in-time service of moving them to their orbit they need to be in, bringing satellites up out of Earth's gravity well into an operational orbit. Very high value, very low volume. The middle point is kind of the bulk of our offering, which is end-of-life service. Every satellite in space now that we're aware of the space debris problem and we're aware of how dangerous it is, has a responsibility enforced by regulatory agencies in every developed country to deorbit itself at the end of the satellite's mission life. The issue is that if you have a satellite that needs to be responsible for its own deorbit, you cannot wait until that satellite breaks. Because if it breaks, it can no longer deorbit itself. So you need to find a point where the risk is too high of it failing, and that's when you deorbit a fully functional satellite that could keep making money. An example I like to give to bring it home, one of our customers that we've been talking to launched a satellite in 2007, and it had 3 flight computers on it, a primary and 2 backups. The primary lasted for 10 years and then failed. Totally fine in the scope, it jumped over to one of the backup computers and kept operating. That backup computer lasted for 7 years, and then it failed. Again, just fine. 2024, it jumps over to the 3rd flight computer. And so by statistics, that 3rd computer is going to last somewhere between 4 and 10 years, right? There's an unknown amount of time, but it's measured in years. But that customer is deorbiting that satellite this year because they can't take the risk of that last computer failing and there being no backup to jump to. So the offer from KMI is let us be in position up in space so that you keep it running. You let it run for several years more. And once it finally fails, we will be responsible for that deorbit. Yes, that costs more than having the satellite do it itself. But when you get years of additional revenue out of a satellite without having to pay to launch a new one, that makes it worth it. It makes it a win-win. That realization was about as pivotal for the company as getting this prototype up to the ISS. Realizing the way to create a win-win situation for the customer, not in the far off future, not in a time when their shareholders are not even looking right now, but in an immediate and instant moment. That was a key to take us from trying to survive to thriving. And then finally, we still offer the active debris removal. That's still a core part of what we do as a company. And every year we are finding more and more cases by getting better at analyzing and better at sales, finding cases where a customer realizes, oh yeah, I do have a debris problem. I need some help solving that. And we're working on the biggest use case, of course, which is the governments of the world who have that shared responsibility saying, oh yeah, we should probably solve this problem before it gets any worse.
Adam, a question about
Yes.
that. How do you catch some of that smaller debris or small debris?
So the smaller debris is a very interesting and dangerous case. Our system is designed to catch 10 centimeters and larger objects, which means if something is smaller than 10 centimeters, we won't be able to catch it. It'll go through our tentacles, through the gaps between them. We don't have that method. unless I want to capture 3,000 of them all at once. Because the way that they are created is they're not launched as small pieces. They once were a larger piece that got hit by debris. And when it was hit by debris and fragmented, it became thousands of pieces of small debris. So the argument there is not for KMI is going to be the one to clean up the small debris. It is we need to clean up just a couple of these largest, most dangerous objects before they become the small debris. That's the first immediate step that needs to be taken to stabilize the environment. And that will buy us the time to figure out more creative methods to clean up the smaller debris, which, by the way, there are other companies that have incredibly creative methods for how they're going to do that. And I want to prepare the environment so that they have the time to finish their prototyping.
Right. Well, innovation sort of catches up with the problem. So you've identified a market need here, which begs the question if you can talk a little bit more about the process of customer discovery. And when you face the product, the question is, can you talk a little about your process of customer discovery when you face the product market fit challenge?
Yep.
How
So
much
for
of it would
us,
you say is intuition, and how much would you say it's data?
so my background is actually a master's of data science. And while I was getting that degree, my job at the airline, they mentioned, oh, the work we do here is more of an art than a science. And that phrase of more of an art than a science is kind of like just hits me in my core, because I believe that means you need to understand the process a little bit better. And so for our case of identifying the customer, it did start intuitive. It did start with our knowledge of the space environment, our knowledge of what satellites tend to be in what orbits, and reaching out to those customers on just a hunch that they are going to be a customer. As we got the feedback of which ones were interested and which ones weren't, we used that to refine our intuition into hypotheses, where we said, we believe that this is the correlation that leads to a customer acquisition. We believe that it's these characteristics that allow us to find a customer, and then started being proactive. There are data sets. Many of these companies are publicly traded. I love nothing more than a nice fat 178-page public financial disclosure that I can pour through and figure out, oh, this is what the company is spending on debris avoidance maneuvers. This is what the company is spending on new satellites that they have to launch because the old ones are breaking. And I can pour that into a statistical model that says this customer has potential. And so that's the state we're at now, is enough time trying it sort of manually to start to automate the process, to start to gather those statistics and say, this is what my ideal customer looks like. These are the customers that are closest to that right now. And by doing that, we can see that our success rate is climbing. It's no longer a 1 in 10 returns our call. We flipped it, and now 9 out of 10 return our call, because we're being specific and accurate rather than broad and kind of general. Any other questions?
No, I think that's what we had right now.
Excellent. So then the last thing that I want to mention, and kind of the last innovation we had, was not just about pricing as regards to the actual dollar amount, but also how we price and really how we charge. So charging your customer. This graph right here is a representative example of how our customer acquisition might work. The customer pays for their satellite all at the beginning. That's one bad part about the space environment, is it's capital intensive. You have to pay for it all up front, but then you make all your money afterwards. So say they have to pay $16 million for their satellite. That's a pretty reasonable cost for a modern satellite. And then each year that satellite operates, they make about $4 million. The chart does include interest on the loan when they first buy a satellite, as well as interest on the returns once they pay that loan off. And so you can see that the line, it takes them a little bit after 5 years to pay it off. And then at the end, they've made $22 million. But that tick at the end is paying us $8 million to remove the satellite. This is what it looks like when the payment arrives when services are provided immediately. In that situation, that hurts. To go from a $22 million success down to a $14 million success, that hurts. Even though you made $14 million, even though that's a great result, that is the part that's hard for the customer, of paying it at the end, especially if that end is when they decided they need to remove the satellite and they lose all their revenue at that point. So not only have they lost their recurring revenue from the satellite, I've now slapped them with a massive cost right at the end. The alternative that we looked at was a service fee over time. So what you don't quite see here is about a $500,000 per year charge every year the satellite is in operation. Now, that does delay their quote unquote payoff period by 1 year, but by the end of it, their point that they reach at year 10 is the exact same value as the final point on the service fee provided. One additional part though, this model, the service fee model, the reason they would pay a service fee is not because we say, oh, hey, in 10 years, we're going to remove your satellite. It's the value of when your satellite fails, we'll remove it. Suddenly, that has a different connotation, because if it's when your satellite fails, we can add a few more years to this. And this is the part I was talking about it being a win-win situation. Instead of stopping at 10 years, they're able to go on for several more years making revenue, which is the most valuable because they've already paid off the satellite. So that's just pure profit for them, making that extra revenue. And in this situation, you end up where the full service fee made $8 million for KMI, and the customer ended up with $13.7 million as their kind of profit. The service fee model made us actually $12 million, because not only did we get more time of them paying the service fee, we also were collecting interest on our end on the payments that they made in advance. So we're able to really get a lot of extra value out of it from our side. But for the customer as well, they made $29.1 million of profit because they got extra years of service. So this is not we found a way to scrape a little bit of money, a little bit more money out of the customer. This was a situation where we found a win-win situation. We found a way for the customer to make more money and for us to make more money. And while this seems optimistic, these are the conversations that I'm having right now with customers. These are the contracts that I'm negotiating, is exactly this model of, hey, it's going to be a service fee and and I'm upfront with them, it's going to end up costing more in the long run, but you're going to make more money with that model. You're going to have a better advantage of doing it this way. And so the takeaway from this is think about not just how much you want to charge your customer for the product, whether it's a software license or a hardware product or a service, professional service. Don't think about it from the perspective of what you want for your balance sheet. Think about it from the customer perspective of how will it feel to pay for this. I'll say my tax accountants are actually really good at this, because they don't charge me until I get my tax return where they figure out, hey, we saved you $30,000 in tax. Isn't that great? Give us $10,000. Right? That balances where they don't charge me until they've made me money. If they said, pay me $10,000 now, and I hope I'll make you money in the future, I would say no, because that doesn't work with the psychology of me as a customer, because that's a future benefit, but a current pain. So working out your payment schedule to not be just, hey, it's once a month, it's software as a service, it's what everyone is doing. Instead, look at the product you're offering, the value that it provides, and when that value occurs related to the payment that you're charging. That's how you find the services that have really locked in, oh, if we offer 2 weeks free, that is when we can start charging, because those 2 weeks is how long it takes for them to start seeing the benefits, or offerings like that. That's the goal here, is make it easy for the customer to agree, yeah, this is a win-win. So with that, I am at the end of my slides. This seems like an incredibly complicated image for the end of my slides, but I figured if I started with the rocket launch, I should end with the docking. So this was the view of the cargo Dragon as it approached the ISS with our payload on board. I did not know that in the middle I would have the images from the test, but it's kind of fun that I can start with the rocket launch and end with the docking. This was more stressful for me than the rocket launch. Even though this part has worked nearly every time, watching it close in and seeing the numbers as the range decreased, this was even more stressful. But with that, are there any questions about KMI, about what we're doing, or about the industry in general?
Yeah, I have one question for you from Mark. It says, what's the operator's legal financial liability if they just leave the satellite in orbit?
So in the US, we have two agencies, the FCC and NOAA. FCC is responsible if you want a license in order to communicate with your satellite, and NOAA is responsible if you want to take pictures of the Earth. Those two activities account for most of what commercial satellites do. If you violate their rule, which by the way is called the 5-year rule. So if you leave the satellite up in space after it breaks, you have 5 years to deal with it. But if you don't deal with it in that 5 years, you could lose your license, not only for that satellite, but for other satellites that are currently in space. That means you would not be able to service the US market, which is a third of the global space market. Europe also has a similar agency that has the same rule. So if you violate the US agency, you would violate the European agency, which is the other third of the space market. So you would lose 2/3 of the global market by not following this rule. Even more severe, the FCC has already started preemptively rejecting licenses if they don't think the deorbit plan is strong enough. If they look at it and say, we don't believe in your ability to deorbit in time, we're not going to even give you permission before you launch. And several companies have been caught by that, where they spent millions, hundreds of millions on a fleet of new satellites, and they're stuck on the ground until they can develop a better solution. And you better believe we're talking to all of them.
Wow, it's pretty interesting that they must think it's such a big problem in the space industry if they're preemptively not giving away licenses because of that. They don't think you have a good enough plan. I have a question here. Anyone know the Canadian equivalent for the FCC?
Sorry, say that one more time.
The Canadian equivalent of FCC.
Oh, I don't remember the acronym, but they absolutely have one.
Well, it's good to know. At least there is one, but we just don't have the answer here.
And to call that out, so that is dealing with spectrum law. If you talk to a lawyer and say, are you a space lawyer? They may say, oh, probably not, or only dabbled in it. If you ask them if they're a spectrum lawyer, a lot more have been involved in that, because that's dealing with the electromagnetic spectrum. How much room in the airways do we have for signals? And satellites are a giant part of that. So every country has some agency that is responsible for regulating that spectrum usage, which means every country has some agency that you have to talk to about, hey, my satellite is overhead and I want to beam a signal down to customers in your country. I need permission for that. So this is something that is, the rarity is when it doesn't exist. The default is that it exists for every country.
Got it. Do satellites have a come home feature?
Have a come home feature?
Like, is there a way that it's programmed to come home after
So
a certain amount of time?
So basically end of life kind of solution for, an automatic drag tether or a solar sail or something that would bring the satellite down in the event that it failed. Two issues with that. One, if it is any kind of digital come home failures feature, you have the issue of what if the computer fails? That is the critical error of the computer shuts down, it's not working, it can't run that software. The other is, what if it's a mechanical kind of automatic where it's on a watchdog, and if the software doesn't ping it every couple of seconds, it automatically deploys. That's now an even worse risk failure, because what if that deploys early? What if there's a glitch in the software or a mechanical failure and you have your deorbit deploy, 2 years into your mission? So both solutions exist and have been tried, but often have resulted in worse outcomes than trying to rely on the satellite to deorbit itself before it breaks down.
Okay. How do you change the orbit of a satellite? Does your spacecraft have thrusters with sufficient fuel for each type of satellite?
Yeah, the way we describe our spacecraft is it is an end effector on one side, an engine on the other, and as much fuel as we could cram in between the two. Because that's really what our service is the ability to move kilograms, kilometers in space. So once we grab onto a satellite, navigating to it is its own challenge, where we have to adjust the orbit quite a lot. Once we've grabbed onto it, the only thing we need to change is bringing the altitude down, or in some cases, actually bringing it up to a higher graveyard orbit, which is designated as a point where we're just leaving all our trash. In either case, just adjusting the altitude is both a simpler orbital operation and one that takes less fuel. So that is why we've designed the spacecraft to be able to perform 3 or 4 missions, because we know that the complicated part occurs when it has no burden on it and no extra mass. And then once we grab the object, we kind of have the simple part, which is just lowering the altitude. Great question. Vanessa, you are muted.
That was our last question.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you so
Well,
much, Adam. This has been so insightful just to see not just the journey that KMI has gone through, but also the methodology, the thought behind it, right? Some of the learnings that you've had that I think would be applicable for all, particularly when you're talking about some of the pricing tactics and understanding demand.
if I can mention one final kind of takeaway, which was a key part of why we're based in Michigan. When we
Uh-huh.
founded the company as a space company, we asked the first question of where are the other space companies? And they were in California, Texas, and Florida, and a little bit Colorado, but mostly those three.
Mhm.
And something about that is that those three are beautiful places, right? They all have similar weather, similar climates, and they're similar environments. And we looked at that and said, what if we can be different? What if one of our key advantages is that we're somewhere that isn't like those places? And that's why we founded in the Upper Peninsula. That hypothesis was that we would attract talent not by offering completely competitive stock options or crazy salaries, but by offering an opportunity that was different from all the rest. And that has proven more than true. Michigan has been an incredibly valuable home for the company, not just because of all the support we get from the state, but because there is a healthy portion of professionals working in the industry that say, I want to get back to Michigan if only there was a job for me there. And by offering that job, we're able to attract that talent.
That's amazing. Thank you for giving Michigan some props and for keeping it here as well. So a lot of the comments that I'm seeing now, Adam, are just talking about how awesome the presentation was, inspiring. We have someone that mentioned that I am a STEM educator as well as a business owner, and you inspire me in both roles. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, guys. Now I'm a satellite expert. So thank
Wonderful.
you so much, Adam, and thank you everyone for joining us.